Hi guys, it's Joey, and this is going to be a bit of a talky type video. In part, it's going to be sort of a VR to Indigo Speaker's Cowardice video, because I really wanted to talk about something that he touched on, which was basically herd mentality and the sort of either denying responsibility for oneself as part of a mass group of people, or to sort of try and placate a mass group of people even if you don't agree with their take on the world or their moralistic standpoint and things of that nature. And since watching that video, it's kind of stayed with me, and I was kind of mulling around the idea of doing a video about it, and I thought, well, how does this best relate this to, I don't want to say paganism because of its, being an umbrella term and it's a little bit vague, but perhaps as spiritual seekers. For people who are claiming to be seeking spiritual truth through their path. And I say truth like that because truth is one of those loaded words, one of those words which is more subjective than we allow the word to be, because one person's truth isn't another person's truth. And I was mulling around that idea this morning, how we should be focusing on how to contribute best to our path rather than being in a state of competition with anybody else's path, and without trying to comply with anybody else's path in this herd mentality, in this I will go with what the clique says, what the group says, whether I believe it to be right or not. And I think a lot of us will have experienced this in some form or another at one point in our lives, and any time that you felt discriminated against by a group of people, that's very likely to be herd mentality. The majority of us have probably encountered this within our school years, although it's plenty rife amongst adults. You hear people talk about the PTA or book club or whatever, and groups of women tend to get a bad rep for that sort of thing, but I think it's perfectly discriminatory opportunities for both genders. I think it happens in male groups, female groups and mixed groups perfectly fine. I just think it's easier to sort of target groups of women and say women are more likely to do that. I don't believe that. I think it can happen. I think that's a whole topic unto itself, how sort of society encourages women to get at other women rather than stand by other women, and I made a whole video on that some time ago about sisterhood, so we won't go into that. We will stick with herd mentality. Herd mentality is whereby a group of people basically charge all over the place, carry on in behaviours which are perhaps questionable in terms of ethics and morals, and sometimes even breaking the law on that level, as well as it being an unpleasant thing for them to be engaging in. And there is a sort of a sense of denied responsibility, that they put the responsibility somewhere else, and then this mob mentality comes into things whereby people act more aggressively in groups. Excuse me for drinking, I will have a sip of water every so often. And if you haven't seen Derren Brown's The Game Show for a sort of psychological experiment en masse with this, I absolutely insist that you go watch Derren Brown's The Game Show. I was horrified when I actually watched it that it was set up so the audience believed that they were on a game show, and they were making choices over this man's experiences, and he didn't know he's being followed by cameras and all the rest of it. And they precursored the show by sort of making him out to be a bit of a douche, like he cheated on his girlfriend and he wasn't you know, an A-OK guy. So somehow in people's minds they started judging him and sort of thinking, you know, setting them up a little bit to be a little bit more cruel. And the choices that they made throughout the show were to do with whether giving him a pleasant experience or a not so pleasant experience. And it started off tame. So it started off a girl accusing him of pinching her ass in the pub, and then how her boyfriend then reacted was, you know, whether he got quite shouty with him or if he just walked away and ignored him. And every single time the audience were picking the negative thing and laughing about it on in this group mentality, this mob mentality, this herd negative experience. And the show went on and on and on, and things got worse and worse and worse, to the point where the audience voted to, and it was sort of anonymous on their little keypads, sort of anonymous. They voted for him to have his flat and his flat screen TV and all his stuff smashed up, and it got progressively worse to the point where they voted to have him kidnapped. And the show ended by him escaping the kidnap that they'd planned for him, and him getting hit by a car. And the shock was a value of him being hit by the car is supposed to be at the end what really sort of punched the audience in the gut to get them to wake up from what they'd been doing. He had not been hit by a car that was set up by the show, and it was just an experiment, a psychological, social experiment en masse to show how humans reacted to those situations, basically being cruel to a human being who they thought deserved it, within a sort of studied environment, if you like. And it was terrifying. It made for terrifying viewing. And the idea is that these two forces sort of came into play, whereby there's the mob mentality, the herd mentality. We go along with what everybody else is doing and it's hilarious, and then actions become more cruel through this. And then denied responsibility because Darren Brown's there as a celebrity or whatever, and not really egging them on, but shall we, you know, be playing the game show host as if it was all good fun. And the idea of denied responsibility has actually been studied quite a lot in psychology, and there are some quite scary experiments. And one that I actually studied in psychology when I studied it at A-level was Milgram's experiment following the trials of Adolf Eichmann, architects of the Holocaust. In those trials, Adolf Eichmann claimed he was simply following orders, and all these horrific acts that he committed, he was just following orders. So Milgram set up an experiment whereby volunteers electrocuted learners, the learners were volunteers, for getting a question wrong, and from a teacher who was also a volunteer, wearing a lab coat. So if the learner got the question wrong, the teacher would administer an electric shock. They couldn't see the person, they were supposed to be in the next room, and the volts were supposed to stack up per wrong answer. And some 65% gave shocks up to max level, though they believed it could be fatal, and were seemingly hearing screams from the next room. Denied responsibility, you've put me in this position of authority and told me I have to do this, therefore I'm doing it, even though in their mind they were electrocuting someone else. So what has this got to do with anything, and why are we talking about herd mentality? Well, after watching Indigo Speaker's video, I was thinking about it in terms of a pagan experience, a spiritual seeker's experience. Particularly in my spiritual path, I fully believe that a lot of people come to pagan-based paths because they are searching for something and they want to be free from orthodox religions that have very, perhaps outmoded, outdated, very strict rules about this, that and the other, and they sort of confine people, and people feel like they can't search for themselves, they can't look for answers, they can't grow in the ways that they want to, they can't explore things through, say, divination, they can't do all those things that they want to be free to embrace who they are as people while searching for a spiritual path. And that's why a lot of people turn to the freer, if you like, spiritual seeking paths. Now, and what I have noticed is that so people don't seem to fully understand the idea that although there is nobody dictating to you, that means that the responsibility is on you, and it's personal responsibility to sort of govern your actions and not behave in such a way as the people shocking other people. Not engaging in herd mentality because we are afraid of this supposed mass body of people who we should be placating, because we have to come across as perfect pagans and nicey rather than just be honest about who we are as human beings, because not everybody is perfect and none of us can be, and it's kind of a foolish thing to search for anyway. But what people seem to miss is when you are responsible for yourself, you should be responsible for your actions and your words and engage in moralistic behaviour because you are seeking it, because you are putting those behaviours on yourself, and it's not up to you to be judging whomever else in their path. And I've seen groups of people in a lot of different spiritual walks get quite aggressive against other spiritual groups. And the trap for a lot of pagans is to get into groups and get quite argumentative about Christianity. Now, I've met some unpleasant Christians, but I have met some unpleasant pagans as well. And to be honest, there are people that you will get on with and people that you won't get on with in every spiritual denomination. There are people who do terrible, terrible things who have no spiritual denomination at all, or use their spiritual sort of cloak as a shroud to behave in a bad way, you know, to get away with it because of the power and influence that it might bring. And therein becomes another problem with denied responsibility, you know, oh, this spiritual leader said this, that and the other, and right when things get, you know, really far down that line, we get cult-like behaviour. And I'm not talking about people slinging mud at each other and calling each other cult-like behaviours. I'm talking about full-on proper cult behaviours who take the lives of people, who brainwash people, who kill people en masse, you know, mass suicide and things. These things aren't funny. These are things which destroy lives. They're very real, problematic parts of society which exist to this day. And they'll have a charismatic leader and the responsibility comes denied and that herd mentality gets in, and, you know, people do all sorts of crazy, scary things, and you hear stories from survivors, and there's stories of abuse and sexual abuse and brainwashing and poverty, enforced poverty, and all sorts of really terrible things in the name of spirituality. That's like right down there at the far end of the crazy, but it's worth bearing this in mind when we are engaging in our spiritual path, because it can be all too easy to start hating on individuals for whatever reason, because we either become part of a herd or we think, you know, oh, this person whom I look up to is against X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to be against X, Y, and Z, and I'm not going to take responsibility for myself. And I mean, it drives me nuts, it really does, because I was talking to my friend the other day and I said, I would rather be completely by myself than surrounded by people who are fake and cliquey and it's going behind the backs and slagging off. I said I'd rather be by myself, and she was agreeing with me, and we were talking about it, because part of this taking responsibility for yourself is not putting out a fake persona of who you are. It's not playing into expectation of how a person should be. And I was talking to someone else about these ideas that we put in our own heads, or voices that we've got from our childhood or from society in general, about who we should be as a person, as a human being. You have, if you haven't got a house, if you haven't got stuff, if you haven't got money, you've failed. If you're not earning X, Y, and whatever a month, you've failed. If you've not got married and had kids by age X, then you've failed. And we in a sort of vague general sense, often use these things as a herd mentality to sort of alienate people. Like, oh, you don't have children, so you're, this is one I've had, you don't have children, so your opinions on children don't matter. And the fact I raised my sisters, I've got nephews and a nephew and a niece, and I've had part in my nephew's upbringing, has no bearing on anything, because I personally have not given birth. And all this sort of herd mentality of alienating people who are slightly different from ourselves is so far against what I believe the spiritual seekers should be doing, that it kind of sort of blows my mind. I was thinking about this in terms of, you know, we're all supposed to be on our path to better ourselves, to seek, to become more than we are, to help the world rather than taking all the time, to help people rather than taking all the time, you know. And I often wonder, why at the core of everything seems to be this whole selfish sort of bubble that comes up, and then these herd mentality sort of reinforce and take away responsibility when we're doing things which we shouldn't be doing. Because I've seen a lot of it in not just in paganism. I kicked the cord there, sorry, I think it's alright. Okay. Not just in paganism, but in life in general, of people behaving in really selfish ways and surrounding themselves with groups to reinforce it, to shove aside anyone who speaks out. And I've had it happen to me at school, and I've had it happen to me since. And instead of embracing what is different about people, we're like trying to squash down what's different about people, and all have to have the same opinion about something rather than embracing different opinions. And we start insulting people. Like Indigo Speaker mentioned, he was insulted for having a different opinion about how we should react to pressure to conform to some ideal that's not ours. And these ideals that we're being pressured to conform to, if we conform to them, we become little pod people and nothing ever gets changed, and we allow this negative behaviour just to keep going. And I've had this coming into energies into my life in different ways recently. Like, just because I'm not engaging in the kind of work that somebody else thinks I should, therefore I failed. And whether or not I work into a system which I strongly disagree with, or try and find a path for myself in my own way, it's entirely up to me. It's nobody else's business. But yet there's this judgment coming through, this herd mentality of, well, you are not doing what the masses are doing, therefore you're doing it wrong. And just blech. It's really interesting in terms of psychology, actually, like why the humans human race feels that we all need to cower and hide behind other people and not take responsibility for ourselves, especially those of us who are supposed to be spiritually seeking our own path. Those of us who supposedly rejected religious indoctrination of any kind to seek for ourselves, you know? We will not be told what we believe, we want to seek it. And then somewhere that gets misplaced and suddenly ranks close in and you have to be doing this to be accepted, to be part of the in crowd or whatever. And it's been going on, and the more and more I see of it, the more and more I sort of go back into my hermit state, because I just don't like it. I'm not going to be told how to react or who to talk to or how to you know, be this sugary sweet fake person and lie about how I feel. And ugh, on levels. I just don't fully understand how, as seekers of enlightenment, this is such a thing. Like, we have to have, you know, this person has this, so I have to have this. Or this person's doing these videos, so I have to do these videos. And, oh, this is in this group, so I have to be in this group. And we have to do it this way, and click, 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 click. And it sort of, we're sort of destroying our individuality. And paganism is supposed to be about diversity. And instead of celebrating diversity, there's a lot of judgment going on. I mean, I've seen people say that, you know, people in the spiritual path can't engage with X, Y, and Z. I've seen people say, if recently, again, this has come up, if your family isn't traditional in this path, if your ancestors don't come from this lineage, then you can't be that. I was told, this is fun, I can't engage in the Celtic path because my parents aren't Scottish. My one side of my family is from the Welsh denomination and there's Irish in the other, so that's two forms of Celtic history coming through the bloodlines. But I couldn't give a rat's ass about whether or not that I had that in my ancestry, because it's not about that. It's not allowing history to dictate who I am today and what spirituality I seek. My spiritual truth is my spiritual truth. And if it enriches our lives, if it increases our sense of individuality, if it allows us to connect to deity or spirit or however you see it, and to enrich yourself as a person, then you should be grasping those things and, you know, doing things that increase your self, not worth, but fulfillment perhaps, without it becoming about, oh, what's this person doing? Well, if you're looking outwards into that herd mentality, if you're looking out at what everyone else is doing, you are never looking in at what you are doing. And that's what we need to be doing. So that's my little random waffle on for the day. Many blessings.